Some promises are written in ink, and some are written in hunger. Out on the frontier, a woman could cross half a country with a child on her hip and still be carrying the heaviest thing in silence. A man could own land, horses, and a roof that kept out rain and still set a place at his table for a ghost. Folks used to say, love came like lightning. But I have lived long enough to know better. Sometimes it comes like bread rising near a warm stove, quiet and slow, after everyone has nearly given up waiting. The southbound train screamed in Mercy Flats, New Mexico territory, with sparks snapping under its wheels and red dust blowing sideways across the depot boards. Tabitha Eldridge stepped down before the conductor had finished setting the stool. Her black traveling skirt caught on a splinter. Her right arm tightened around the baby bundled against her breast, and with her free hand she dragged a battered carpet bag that had one brass latch tied shut with twine. A blue ribbon hung from the bag handle, faded nearly gray. It was the only pretty thing about her. The baby gave a weak, fretful cry. At the far end of the platform, Gideon Talbot stood beside a freight wagon with his hat low and his jaw locked hard enough to ache. In his vest pocket was the advertisement he had placed 3 weeks earlier. Wanted, steady ranch cook, room, board, fair wages, no foolishness. He had expected a woman with flour on her sleeves and no questions in her mouth. He had not expected a widow in black, hollow eye from travel, holding a baby like the whole world had teeth. He looked past her once, toward the train steps, as if another woman might follow. Nobody did? You Tabitha asked. Her voice was soft, but it did not bend. Gideon took 2 steps toward her and stopped when he saw the ring on her glove, turned inward so the stone faced her palm. He noticed the baby's cracked lips. He noticed the way her shoulders stayed square even while her knees trembled. I am Tabitha Eldridge. His eyes narrowed. The letters said Mrs. Eldridge could cook. I can. It did not say you were bringing a child. It did not say I must leave him to starve. The baby whimpered again, a thin thread of sound that made 3 men near the telegraph office turn and stare. Tabitha shifted him higher, shielding his face from dust with her shawl. Gideon looked at the baby, then at the carpet bag, then at the depot clock ticking above the ticket window, as if time itself had come to judge him. I posted for a cook, he said. Tabitha swallowed. I answered as a cook. That preacher in Santa Fe wrote that. You were willing to enter a respectable arrangement if need be. Her eyes flickered. Only once. He wrote what he thought would get me safely placed. A gust moved down the platform and lifted the corner of Gideon's coat. He had not wanted a wife. The town had decided he needed one. His hired men had decided he needed one. Even the minister had hinted that a widower with a ranch and no woman in the house was turning strange. Gideon had wanted beans not burned black, biscuits not used as doorstops, and someone who could keep his 2 motherless children from eating cold molasses for supper. He looked toward his wagon. Behind the seat lay sacks of flour, a broken stove handle from the mercantile, and a small wooden horse with one ear chewed off. His youngest, Ruth, had tucked it there that morning and whispered, "Bring back somebody kind." Gideon removed his hat, wiped sweat from his brow, and put it back on. What is the baby's name? Tabitha's grip changed so slight most men would have missed it. Samuel. He yours? She looked straight at him. He is mine to care for. That was not an answer. Gideon heard it plainly. The station agent opened the depot door, spat tobacco juice into the dust, and called, "Talbot. That your bride cook?" A laugh ran along the platform, small and mean. Tabitha's chin lifted, but color rose under her travel-worn veil. Gideon turned his head slowly. "She is under my protection until I say otherwise." The laugh died. For a moment, all that could be heard was the train breathing steam and the baby trying to cry without strength. Before we ride farther, tell me where you're listening from tonight. If this story finds a tender place in you, give it a like. Share it with someone who loves frontier tales and subscribe so more quiet hearts can gather around this fire. Now let us return to Mercy Flats. Gideon took the carpetbag from Tabitha's hand. She did not release it at first. "I have nothing in there worth stealing," she said. "Then you have nothing to fear. That is not always how fear works, Mr. Talbot." He looked at her then, truly looked. Beneath the dust, her face was fine-boned and pale from too many sleepless nights. Her bonnet brim had been crushed on one side. Her gloves were mended the fingers. She smelled faintly of train smoke, milk gone sour, and lavender soap stretched too long. "Can the child sit a wagon ride?" he asked. He has sat worse? Gideon wanted to ask what worse meant. Instead, he held out his arm. Tabitha ignored it and climbed into the wagon by herself, awkward but determined, using the wheel hub for a step while keeping Samuel pressed close. She winced when her boot touched the footboard. "You hurt?" "No." "You limp?" I said no. He set the carpetbag behind the seat. Something inside knocked wood against metal. A locked box, maybe, or a framed thing wrapped in cloth. On the ride out of town, Tabitha sat as far from him as the wagon bench allowed. The road ran west through dust and brittle mesquite, then opened toward the low hills where the Talbot Ranch sat under a wide hammered sky. Wind worried the baby's blanket. Gideon reached behind the seat and took an old horse blanket, faded brown and rough at the edges. "For him," he said. She hesitated before taking it. "Thank you." Samuel tucked one fist beneath his chin and made a sucking motion in his sleep. "He hungry?" Gideon asked. "He has had milk?" "When?" Tabitha looked away. "Enough." Gideon knew that word. Men used it when there wasn't any. He stopped the wagon beside a shallow wash where a few cottonwoods rattled in the heat. From a sack at his feet, he took a biscuit wrapped in cloth and a piece of dried apple Ruth had begged him to buy in town. He offered both. Tabitha stared at the fruit as if it might accuse her. "I am employed then?" she asked. "You are riding to the ranch?" "That is not the same." "No," Gideon said. "It is not?" She took the biscuit and broke off a crumb no larger than a fingernail. She touched it to Samuel's lips, but he turned his head, too young for bread and too tired for trying. Then, with visible shame, she put the crumb in her own mouth. Her eyes closed for half a breath before she opened them again. Gideon faced the road and pretended not to see. The Talbot Ranch appeared near sundown, a long, low house with a patched porch, a smokehouse leaning at one corner, corrals silvered by dust, and cottonwood trees planted by hands long gone. Beyond it, cattle speckled the range like black stones dropped over yellow grass. The place was not poor, but sorrow had settled over it like a second roof. A girl of about 7 came running from the yard, her braid flying undone. A boy, maybe 10, stood behind her with a rifle too large for him, and a face that had learned suspicion early. "Pa!" the girl cried. Then she saw Tabitha and slowed. The boy did not. He raised the rifle halfway. "Who's she?" Gideon swung down. "Lower that, Caleb. She got a baby. I have eyes." "She the cook?" Tabitha turned her face toward the boy. "I hope to be." The girl moved closer. One thumb in her mouth, though she seemed too old for it. She stared at Samuel. "Is he dead?" Tabitha's breath caught. "No," Gideon said more sharply than he meant. "He is sleeping." Ruth flinched. Gideon hated himself for it. Tabitha saw the flinch, and without making a show of kindness, she shifted Samuel so the girl could see his tiny nose and the dark fan of his lashes. "He sleeps very still when he is tired," Tabitha said. Like a field mouse hiding from a hawk, Ruth stepped close enough to touch the blanket with one finger. "Does he bite?" "Only pride so far." The girl smiled before she remembered not to. Caleb kept his eyes on Tabitha. "Our last cook left because Ruth cried at night." "Caleb," Gideon warned. "She did," the boy said. "And because Pa don't talk." "I do talk," Gideon muttered. "When somebody's horse is lame." Tabitha looked toward the house. In the front window, A curtain hung half-torn from its rod. On the porch rail sat a woman's sunbonnet, weather-faded and still. Beside the door, on a nail, hung a gray shawl with a blue border. It was too carefully placed to be forgotten, too dusty to be used. Gideon saw her noticing. "My wife's," he said. The words came out flat and hard. Tabitha nodded once. "I will not touch what is not mine." He almost told her nothing in that house was hers. Instead, he lifted her carpet bag and led the way inside. The kitchen smelled of cold ash, spilled grease, and beans left too long in a pot. Dirty dishes sat stacked in a tin pan. A loaf of bread, hard as a stone, lay under a cloth. The stove was large, black and sulking, its front hinge broken. 2 cups sat on the table. One was chipped brown and had clearly been used that morning. The other was blue china, clean, placed at the far end. Tabitha looked at the blue cup. Gideon picked it up too quickly and set it in the cupboard. "That cup stays there," he said. "Of course." Ruth crept to the table and dragged a finger through flour spilled from a torn sack. She licked it. Tabitha saw. Gideon saw Tabitha seeing. "Ruth," he said, weary. She was hungry. Caleb snapped. "You said wait till supper." "I was making supper." "You was burning it." Silence fell. Samuel stirred and began to cry, not loudly, but with a desperate, exhausted rhythm. Tabitha swayed on her feet. "Where my wash?" she asked. "There's a basin. Water. Pumpin' back." She set Samuel on a folded shawl from her own shoulders, right on the kitchen floor where the boards were cleanest. And before Gideon could tell her to rest, she rolled up her sleeves. "Mr. Talbot," she said, if I am to cook, I need wood split smaller than those chunks by the stove. I need water, clean towels, and that hinge wired until you can replace it. I need those children out from under my feet unless they are helping. I need milk if there is any. And if there is not, I need to know which neighbor has a cow fresh." Caleb's mouth fell open. Ruth whispered, "She talks like school." Gideon stared at Tabitha Eldridge. In 1 minute, she had done what no one else had managed since Clara died. She had told the house what to do. "There's a milk cow," he said. "Bess, she kicks strangers, as so do hungry women." A corner of Caleb's mouth twitched. Gideon went outside for wood. By dark the kitchen had changed, not prettied, not healed, but made answerable. Caleb hauled water with an offended dignity. Ruth washed 3 spoons badly and lined them on a towel, as if they were church silver. Gideon wired the stove hinge with baling wire while Tabitha knelt beside him, holding the lamp steady, the flame trembling between them. "You know stoves?" he asked. "I know hunger." He looked at her hands. They were thin, reddened at the knuckles, but capable. There was a burn scar near her wrist. She caught him looking, tugged her sleeve down. By 9, there was cornmeal mush with milk, fried onions, coffee, and biscuits that had risen imperfectly but honestly. Tabitha fed Samuel with milk softened from a rag, drop by drop, while Ruth watched every motion. "Why don't he have a mama?" Ruth asked. Caleb kicked her under the table. Tabitha's face went still. "Every baby has a story," she said. "What's his?" "A long one." Ruth accepted that with the solemnity of a child who knew long stories often hurt. Gideon sat at the head of the table, but did not eat until everyone else had been served. Tabitha noticed the habit. She also noticed that he put a small spoonful of mush on an empty plate near the stove before remembering himself and scraping it back into the pot. A name lived in that gesture. That night, arrangements were made with the stiffness of strangers trying not to shame each other. "You and the baby can take the little room off the pantry," Gideon said. "Door locks from inside." Tabitha looked at him. He held out a small iron key. Clara used it when Caleb was sick, and she did not want Ruth wandering in. At his wife's name, the room changed. Caleb stood straighter. Ruth lowered her head. Gideon's hand closed tight around the key before he forced it open again. Tabitha accepted it. "Thank you. I sleep in the lean-to room by the back porch most nights." You need not explain yourself to me. I am explaining the house. That is different. He gave a short nod. Her room was barely wider than a bed and a washstand, with shelves smelling of dried apples and mouse droppings. A narrow window looked toward the chicken yard. Tabitha set Samuel in a drawer padded with her petticoat, because there was no cradle. From her carpetbag she took a folded paper packet, a small Bible with a cracked spine, 2 baby shirts, and a tin-framed photograph wrapped in cloth. She paused over the photograph a long while before sliding it beneath the mattress. In the kitchen, Gideon stood alone after the children were in bed. He washed the blue china cup, though it was already clean. Then he set it on the table in its old place. His wife had been dead 16 months. Still, when the wind moved at night, he sometimes woke thinking he heard Clara in the kitchen humming over bread. Sometimes he set out her cup before his mind caught up with his hands. Sometimes Ruth came crying and said she could not remember her mother's voice, and Gideon, who remembered it too much, could not bring himself to imitate it. From the pantry room came the baby's thin cry. Gideon lifted the cup and put it away again. The first week passed in chores, boundaries, and the uncomfortable mercy of usefulness. Tabitha rose before dawn. She moved quietly but not timidly, shaking ash from the stove, coaxing flame under kindling, setting coffee to boil, soaking beans, cutting salt, pork thin enough to last. She counted flour in her head and marked the level on the barrel with a charcoal line. She saved bacon grease in a crock. She taught Ruth to wipe plates with sand before washing when water ran low. She put Caleb in charge of eggs, which insulted him until he discovered hens respected patience more than force. Samuel improved by measures small enough only a frightened woman could celebrate. A stronger cry, a warmer cheek, a hand closing around Tabitha's finger. He had a habit of turning his head toward Gideon's voice whenever the man spoke low. Gideon pretended not to notice, but he stopped scraping his chair so loudly. The children studied Tabitha the way stray dogs study an open door. Caleb did not trust her. He had seen women come after his mother's death with casseroles and pity, touching curtains, rearranging grief, whispering that Gideon Talbot needed to remarry before the children turned wild. Caleb had decided he would bite first. One morning he found Tabitha in the yard, holding a dead chicken by its feet. "Coyote got it?" he asked. "No, Hawk. How do you know?" She pointed to the punctures beneath the wing. "Coyote would tear. Hawk strikes clean." Caleb frowned. "You know animals. I know what hunger makes bold." He looked at her, then away. Ruth had bad dreams again. "I hurt. She don't like folks knowing. Then, I won't know unless she tells me." He considered this law and found it fair. Ruth's fear was smaller and sharper. She feared being forgotten. At meals, she always asked whether there would be breakfast tomorrow. She kept scraps in her apron pocket until they hardened. One afternoon, Tabitha found her hiding half a biscuit beneath the porch step. Tabitha sat beside her without scolding. "Where I came from," Tabitha said. "I used to hide food too." Ruth's eyes widened. "Did somebody take yours? Sometimes life did. Will life take ours? Not today." Ruth leaned against her for one breath, then jerked away, embarrassed by her own need. That evening, Tabitha baked a small pan of molasses cakes with the last of the sweetening. She gave one to each child and wrapped a third in cloth. "This one is tomorrow's," she told Ruth. "It will be in the cupboard. You do not have to hide it. Ask me, and I will give it." Ruth whispered, "Promise, I promise." Gideon heard from the doorway. He had come in with his gloves in hand and dust in the lines of his face. He looked at the wrapped cake, then at Ruth, who was testing trust like thin ice. After supper, he brought in a little wooden crate and set it beside the pantry room door. "For the baby," he said. Tabitha opened it. Inside was a cradle, old but sound, with one side rubbed smooth by years of rocking. A small flower was carved near the headboard. "This was Ruth's," he said, Caleb's before that, I cannot take. You are not taking. He is sleeping in my house. She ran her fingers over the carved flower. Did your wife carve this? My father did. Then it is precious. That is why it should hold something living. She looked up at him then. For the first time, Gideon saw tears in her eyes. They did not fall. Thank you, she said. He nodded and went back outside before gratitude could ask anything of him. The secret began showing itself not as confession, but as fragments. The first fragment was money. Tabitha was paid at the end of her second week, $3 silver and room and board as promised. Gideon placed the coins on the kitchen table after supper. You earned it, he said. She did not reach for them until Caleb and Ruth had gone out to chase fireflies. Then she counted the dollars once, quickly, and slipped one into her Bible. The other two she wrapped in cloth and tucked inside Samuel's cradle mattress. You think somebody here will steal it? Gideon asked. She froze. I think money grows legs when men know a woman has none to spare. Has a man been after yours? All men are after something. Gideon's expression closed. Not on, no, she said quietly. Almost sorry. Not at all. The second fragment was a name. Gideon had gone to the barn late, checking a mare due to foal. Passing the kitchen window on his return, he heard Tabitha inside with Samuel. Her voice was low, broken from weariness. Hush now, little Samuel Crane. No, not Crane. Eldridge. You must be Eldridge now. Gideon stopped in the dark. Crane. It was a name he knew from brands burned into stolen cattle 3 winters back. Rafe Crane had ridden with men who cut fences and moved stock by moonlight. There had been trouble near Socorro, a burned line sack, a deputy shot in the shoulder. Gideon had never met Crane, but he knew the brand. A crooked C with a slash through it. The next morning he said nothing. The third fragment came in town. Tabitha needed yeast, lamp oil, thread, and a bolt of unbleached cotton. Gideon did not want her going into Mercy Flats yet. But supplies were supplies, and gossip starved no slower for being denied. At the mercantile, Mrs. Lottie Vance stood behind the counter with spectacles low on her nose, and judgment polished, bright as glass. Well, she said, looking Tabitha from bonnet to hem, Mr. Tallboss Cook is younger than advertised. Gideon set a sack of nails on the counter. Nails, coffee, molasses if you have it. Lottie ignored him. And the baby. How unusual. Tabitha's hand tightened on the cotton bolt. I need thread, she said. Of course, black for morning, or white for bridal. Heat rose in Tabitha's face. Gideon took one step closer to the counter. Brown, strong. Lottie smiled as if he had confessed more than he meant. The town is wondering whether she is cook or wife. The town might try working for a living. A man near the Cracker Barrel laughed into his sleeve. Lottie's smile thinned. Preacher Abel said he had correspondence regarding a respectable marriage possibility, she said. Would be kinder to settle matters before Tom start. Gideon looked at Tabitha. She was standing very still, Samuel tucked beneath her shawl. The baby had woken and was watching the hanging lanterns with round dark eyes. Outside, 2 boys pressed against the window to stare. Tabitha whispered, I can wait by the wagon. Gideon heard shame beneath the words, not weakness, shame, the kind forced on a person by other people's mouths. He paid for the thread, took the parcel, and said loudly enough for every ear in the store, to Mrs. Eldridge runs my kitchen, feeds my children, and has earned more respect in 2 weeks than most earn in a year. If Mercy Flats needs something to discuss the price of bad coffee. Lottie's neck colored. Tabitha did not look at him until they were back at the wagon. You should not have done that, she said. Why? Because now they will talk worse. They already talked worse. You do not know what talk can cost a woman. Gideon tied the parcels down. I know what silence cost my wife. The words surprised both of them. Tabitha held Samuel closer. What did it cost her? Gideon looked toward the street where dust moved around wagon wheels and boot heels. Everything she needed and would not ask for on the ride home. Neither spoke for a long while. That evening, Tabitha found Ruth sitting by the old gray shawl on the porch nail. "Did my mom make pies?" Ruth asked. "I do not know. Pa says she made them too sweet. That sounds like love complaining." Ruth thought that over. "Do you make pies when there is fruit? We had peaches once. Mama put them up. Pa won't open the jars." Tabitha looked through the kitchen window. In the pantry, high on the shelf, stood 6 jars of peaches, their syrup glowing amber in the lamplight. "Untouched for 16 months. Perhaps he is saving them," she said. "For what?" Tabitha had no answer that would not hurt. Days turned. Heat deepened. The ranch began to carry new sounds. The slap of dough on the table. Samuel's stronger cry. Ruth reciting spelling words while snapping beans. Caleb whistling to the hens when he thought no one heard. Gideon's boots pausing at the kitchen door before entering, as if he had learned not to bring the whole day's dust into a clean room. Tabitha mended more than shirts. She patched the torn curtain, scrubbed grease from the stove bricks, planted bean seeds near the pump, though Gideon said the soil was poor, and opened windows that had stayed shut since Clara's funeral. She did not touch the old shawl. She did not move the blue cup. She never entered the front room. That room remained Clara's. The door was closed most days. Once, Ruth opened it to chase a kitten, and Tabitha saw the narrow bed, a sewing basket, a Bible on a chair, dried flowers tied with ribbon, and a framed photograph of a woman with steady eyes and a mouth that looked as if it had known laughter before illness took hold. On the dresser lay a hairbrush with pale strands still caught in it. Gideon came down the hall and stopped when he saw Tabitha at the threshold. "I was not going in," she said. "I know. I am sorry." "For what?" "For the room. Still hurting." He looked past her to the photograph. His voice dropped. "It hurts worse when it dawned." That night, wind came hot out of the west, rattling shutters and driving grit under the doors. Samuel would not settle. Ruth woke crying that the roof was leaving. Caleb pretended not to be scared and dragged his blanket into the kitchen, saying someone ought to guard the stove. Gideon came in wearing his long john shirt and suspenders, hair mussed, eyes shadowed from sleep. He found all 3 children near Tabitha, Samuel in the cradle, Ruth against her skirt, Caleb by the stove with a poker. "You building an army?" Gideon asked. "Only a fort," Tabitha said. Ruth sniffed. "The wind sounds mad." Gideon sat on the floor beside her. Awkwardly, as if his joints had forgotten softness, he took Ruth's cold foot in his hand and rubbed warmth into it. "My mother used to say wind is just the mountains turning over in bed." "Mountains don't have beds," Caleb said. "Then that explains the noise." Ruth gave a watery laugh. Tabitha was at the stove, warming milk, with a little nutmeg scraped from her hidden store. Gideon noticed. She had been saving that nutmeg for something she never named. "You should keep that," he said. "For what?" "Something important." She poured the milk into tin cups. "This is..." Their eyes met across the lamplight. The wind pressed the house from all sides, but inside the kitchen, for one fragile hour, no one was alone. Near dawn, Gideon woke in his chair. Ruth slept curled under his coat. Caleb slept with the poker still in his hand. Samuel was quiet in the cradle. Tabitha stood at the window, one hand braced on the sill. "You ought to sleep," Gideon said. "So ought you. I am used to not." "That is not a virtue, Mr. Talbot." He rubbed his face. "Gideon." She looked back. "My name is Gideon." A small silence passed. "Tabitha," she said. The way she offered it made it more than a name and less than a promise. 2 days later, the banker came. Horace Vale arrived in a black buggy that looked foolish against ranch dust. He wore a city coat despite the heat and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Gideon saw him from the barn and felt irritation before worry, which told him something was wrong. "Taba," Vale called. You ignoring my letters. I read what needs reading. Then you know the note comes, due in September. The note was extended by your wife's father. He is dead now, and the bank is less sentimental. Gideon's hand tightened around the curry comb. Tabitha stood at the kitchen window, wiping a bowl. She saw the men. She could not hear every word, but she heard enough. Due, interest, foreclosure, north pasture, signature. Ruth came beside her. EIS, Mr. Vale taking our house? No, Tabitha said too quickly. Ruth's tongue went into her mouth, out by the barn. Gideon's voice stayed low. I have cattle going to market in 6 weeks. Market prices fell. I have horses. More gadget. The north pasture is not. You'll be, if you want time. Vale opened his portfolio. A paper flashed. Tabitha's bowl slipped in the wash water. The mark on the document was not large, but from the window she saw it. A crooked C cut with a slash. Her face drained. She left the bowl and went to the pantry room. From beneath the mattress, she pulled the tin photograph frame, then stopped. Behind it, sewn into the lining of the carpet bag, was a folded paper packet sealed with red wax already cracked. She pressed it to her chest as Samuel stirred in the cradle. No, she whispered. Not yet, but secrets have a way of hearing their names. That afternoon, Gideon came to supper later than usual. He had dust on his sleeves and the kind of silence men wore when counting losses. Tabitha set stew before him. He thanked her and did not eat. Caleb watched his father. We losing the ranch? No, don't lie. Gideon's spoon clinked against the bowl. Not if I can help it. Can you? Ruth began to cry without sound. Tabitha reached across and placed a piece of bread in Ruth's hand. Not because bread solved fear, but because a frightened child needed something to hold. Gideon stood abruptly. I need air. After he went outside, Caleb glared at Tabitha as if she had brought the banker in her carpet bag. You'll leave when it gets bad, he said. Tabitha met his eyes. I have stayed through worse than bad. You ain't family. The words hit harder than he expected. He looked sorry at once, but too proud to retrieve them. Tabitha lifted Samuel from the cradle. No, I am not. She went to the pantry room and closed the door. That night she packed. Not everything. She had learned to leave fast and light. 2 baby shirts, the Bible, the coins, the photograph, the paper packet. She folded her black dress, then unfolded it because Samuel needed the cloth more. He watched her with solemn baby eyes, chewing his fist. I know, she whispered. I know. She could not stay and bring Rafe Crane's shadow over Gideon's children. If Horace Vale had Crane papers, others might follow. Men looking for money, men looking for land, men looking for Samuel. She waited until the house quieted. Then she opened the pantry door. Gideon stood in the kitchen, fully dressed, holding his hat. Going somewhere? He asked. Tabitha closed her eyes once. I was going to leave wages I had not earned. You earned them. Then, I was going to leave before dawn. Why? She looked toward the children's room. Because trouble knows my name. I knows mine too. Sit down. I canna. You can. The command in his voice would have angered her if not for the fear beneath it. I heard you say Crane, he said. Tabitha went still. The baby. You called him Samuel Crane. Her hand rose to Samuel's back. Gideon took one step closer, then stopped, giving distance because he was finally learning it mattered. I am not asking to shame you, he said. No man says that before doing it. I am asking because men with Crane's brand might have papers tied to my debt. Her face changed. A small collapse, quickly repaired. Then I must leave tonight? No, you do not know what that name brings. I know what leaving brings. She looked at him, and in the dim lamp glow, he seemed older than he had that morning. Not harder, more honest. Tabitha, he said, don't run from my door without telling me whether wolves are behind you. She laughed once, bitter and exhausted. Wolves would be kinder. Samuel whimpered. She pressed her cheek to his head. My husband was Aaron Eldridge, she said. He died of fever outside Santa Fe last winter. He was a clerk for a land office. Before that, he kept books for men who did not like books kept honestly. Gideon waited. He found records, brands, transfers, a list of ranch notes being bought by false names. Men intended to take land by debt and fear, then run stolen cattle through it. Rafe Crane, was one. Horace Vale might be another, or bought by them. Aaron hid documents. He wrote that if anything happened, I should take them to Judge Merriweather in Las Cruces. She looked at Samuel. Then Aaron died, and 2 men came looking. The baby is Aaron's. Her mouth trembled. No. Gideon said nothing. Tabitha's eyes filled, but again tears did not fall. Samuel is my sister's child. She married Rafe Crane before she knew what he was. She died bringing Samuel into the world. Rafe wanted the boy because there is land in his mother's name. Land Crane cannot sell unless he controls the child. My sister made me swear. Where is Crane now? Supposedly hanged in Arizona. But men like him die on paper more often than in ground. And you carried his child under another name. I carried my sister's son. Gideon lowered his gaze. Yes, that one word nearly undid her. She pulled the paper packet from her bag and laid it on the table. Her hand shook. These are copies Aaron kept. I do not know all their meaning. I only know your ranch mark is there. Talbot, North Pasture. No purchase through Vale by a shell name. And Crane's brand. Gideon did not touch the packet. Why not tell me? He asked. Because you wanted a cook. I did. And because a woman with a baby and a secret is not wanted anywhere for long. The lamp hissed softly. From the children's room, Ruth called in her sleep, Mama. Gideon closed his eyes. Tabitha moved as if to go to her, then stopped, uncertain of her place. Gideon opened his eyes and said quietly, Go on. She went. Ruth was tangled in her blanket, face damp, little hands searching the dark. Tabitha sat on the bed and touched her hair. Hush, Ruth. You are home. Don't leave, Ruth whispered. Not fully awake, Tabitha bent over her. Not tonight. In the kitchen, Gideon sat alone with the packet between his hands. He did not open it until morning. When he did, the world altered. There were land descriptions, false signatures, cattle tallies, bank transfers, and one letter written in Aaron Eldridge's careful hand. It named Horace Vale as the man arranging quiet foreclosures for a group of stock thieves using the Crane brand and 2 other marks. It named Talbot land as desirable because of its water rights. It mentioned a witness in Mercy Flats, a storekeeper who had copied records and then withdrawn testimony after threats. Gideon rode to town with a letter in his coat and a rifle under his leg. Tabitha wanted to go. No, he said. It is my secret. It is my land. It is my sister's child. He stopped saddling. Then we both have stakes. Do not shut me in a kitchen after I carried that paper across deserts. He looked at her for a long moment. There was fear in him, but not of her. Can you shoot? Yes. Well enough to make a man regret standing still. He almost smiled. Almost. They left Caleb in charge of Ruth under strict orders to stay near the house, with hired hand Amos Pike working the south fence close enough to hear a shot. Tabitha rode a small dun mare, Samuel tied against her in a sling. Gideon did not like the baby going, but Tabitha trusted danger. She could see more than danger. That came while she was away. In town, Judge Merriweather was not there. He had ridden to Mesilla for circuit court and would not return for 3 days. 3 days was a lifetime when secrets had been opened. At the Mercantile, Lottie Vance saw Tabitha and went pale. Tabitha noticed. Gideon did too. You copied records. Tabitha said softly. When the store emptied, Lottie busied her hands with ribbon spools. I do not know what you mean. Aaron Eldridge wrote your name. A spool rolled off the counter and struck the floor. Lottie whispered, "Get out." Gideon stepped to the door and turned the sign to closed. Lottie's eyes flashed. "You cannot, Mrs. Vance," he said. "Men are trying to take my ranch, my bay others. I will not be polite about it." Lottie looked at Tabitha. "You should have stayed away." "I tried," Tabitha said. The storekeeper's mouth tightened. For the first time, the polish cracked, and an older, frightened woman looked through. "They came at night," Lottie said. "Two men. One had a scar from ear to chin. Said my nephew in Silver City could have an accident. I burned what I had." "All of it?" Tabitha asked. Lottie hesitated. Gideon leaned forward. "All?" "No." She went to the back room and returned with a ledger page folded inside brown wrapping paper. "I kept one. Foolishness or a conscience. I do not know." The page listed payments from Vale to a man signing as R.C. Rafe Crane. Samuel fussed against Tabitha's chest. Lottie looked at him, and something softened. "That child his?" she asked. "My sister's," Tabitha said. "And you are hiding him." "I am protecting him." Lottie swallowed. "Then you best know. A man asking after a woman with a baby came through 2 days before you arrived. Scar on his face." He looked at Talbot's notice posted by the depot, smiled when he read it. Gideon felt cold beneath his shirt. "Where did he go?" he asked. "South Road. But he said he would circle back when the fruit ripened." Peaches, Tabitha thought absurdly. Clara's unopened peaches glowing in the pantry. On the ride home, the sky turned green-gray. Storm gathered behind the hills, stacking clouds over the range. Gideon rode near enough that his stirrup nearly brushed hers. "I should never have come," Tabitha said. "Yes," he said, eyes on the horizon. "You should. My being there endangers your children. Your being there might save their home. That is not the same as saving their hearts." He looked at her then. "No," he said, "but you have been doing that too." She gripped the reins. He did not add more. He was learning that some words had to stand plain and unadorned, or not at all. The storm broke before they reached the ranch. Rain came hard, rare and violent, turning dust to slick clay. Samuel screamed at the thunder. The mare sidestepped, nervous. Gideon reached for the bridle just as lightning split white over the hills. "Give him to me," he called. Tabitha shook her head. "I have him. The horse is spooking. I said I have him." Another thunderclap. The mare reared. Tabitha held Samuel with one arm and the saddle horn with the other, face white but set. Gideon swung down, caught the mare's head, and walked beside her through the downpour, one hand on the bridle, one hand ready at Tabitha's knee. By the time they reached the yard, Caleb was on the porch with Ruth behind him, both crying without admitting it. "Where were you?" Caleb yelled, furious with fear. "You said before dark." Tabitha slid down, nearly falling. Gideon caught her by the waist before she could hit the mound. For one breath, she leaned into him. Then she stepped away. Ruth ran straight to Samuel and touched his wet blanket. "Hell catch his death." "No, he won't," Tabitha said, though her voice shook. Inside, the kitchen became a battlefield of care. Wet clothes dripped, the stove smoked. Caleb hauled wood without being told. Ruth warmed towels. Gideon stripped off his coat and wrapped it around Tabitha's shoulders, despite her protest. Samuel coughed through the night. By dawn, his skin burned. The doctor was 20 miles away. The rain had washed the creek high. Gideon saddled anyway. "I'll fetch Dr. Bell," he said. "You cannot cross in this," Tabitha said. "I can. You can drown. I can also stay and watch a baby burn." She flinched. He regretted it instantly. "I know fever," she said. "Bring willow bark from the tack room chest. Ruth, clean cloths. Caleb, water. Gideon, If you have whiskey, a spoonful. He stared. Move, she said. They moved. All day, Tabitha fought the fever with cloths, milk, whispers, and stubbornness. Samuel's small fists opened and closed against nothing. Ruth sat by the cradle and sang a broken hymn she only half remembered. Caleb stood at the door, eyes red, asking every hour if babies died from coughing. Sometimes, Tabitha answered once, because she would not lie, but not because we stopped trying. Gideon watched her from the stove, helpless in a way that scraped him raw. He had watched Clara fade by inches, watched doctors shake their heads, watched his own hands prove useless. He hated sickness more than gunfire because no courage could stare it down. Near midnight, Samuel stopped crying. Tabitha bent over him, listening. Gideon could not breathe. Then the baby gave a weak, irritated cough and began to suck at the cloth of Tabitha's sleeve. Ruth burst into tears. Caleb sat on the floor as if his bones had been cut. Tabitha lowered her head until her forehead touched the cradle rail. Her shoulders shook once, only once. Gideon knelt beside her. He is asking for milk, she whispered. I'll get it when he returned. She was still on her knees. He set the cup down and, after a moment's hesitation, rested his hand between her shoulders. She did not pull away. Tabitha, he said. She looked at him. You are not trouble at my door. Something in her face broke open quietly. I am so tired, she said. I know, no, Gideon, I am tired clear through. He wanted to gather her, but he did not. One was not permission. Instead, he sat on the floor beside her until Samuel drank, until Ruth slept against the stove-wood box, until Caleb leaned on his father's shoulder without meaning to. After the fever, things changed by inches. Gideon stopped saying, the baby, and began saying, Samuel. He carved a small rattle from cottonwood and pretended he had been whittling fence pegs. Samuel grabbed Gideon's thumb one evening and would not let go. Gideon sat trapped at the table for nearly 15 minutes, while Tabitha kneaded dough, both of them pretending the whole kitchen had not gone soft. Caleb began asking Tabitha questions and then forgetting to sound suspicious. Why salt the beans after they soften? Because salt makes some skins stubborn, like people. Exactly like people. Ruth stopped hiding food beneath the porch. She still checked the cupboard each morning for the promised cake or biscuit, but she asked now. Sometimes she saved crumbs for Samuel, touching them to his lips, though he was still too little. Gideon opened one jar of Clara's peaches. He did it without ceremony on a Sunday afternoon when heat pressed the house flat and tempers had grown thin. He set the jar on the table, worked the seal loose with a knife, and poured peaches into a white bowl. Ruth stared. Caleb stopped chewing. Tabitha stood by the stove holding a towel. Gideon's voice was rough. Your mother put these up the summer before she got sick, Ruth whispered. Will she be mad? Gideon looked at the peaches shining in syrup. No, I believe she'd be mad we waited. They ate them slowly, as if taking communion with a lost summer. Gideon set one slice aside on the blue china saucer. Then, after a long moment, he cut it in three and gave pieces to Caleb, Ruth, and Samuel, who gummed his with grave confusion. That evening, Gideon took the blue cup from the cupboard and washed it again. Instead of setting it at the empty place, he placed it on the shelf beside Clara's Bible. Tabitha saw, but said nothing. Later on the porch, he found her mending one of Caleb's shirts under lamplight. Clara used to mend there, he said. Tabitha's needle paused. I can move. I was not asking you to. He sat on the step below her. Crickets started in the grass. Far off, a cow bawled for her calf. She asked for peaches the week before she died, he said. I told her I'd open a jar after she rested. She never woke clear enough, so I kept them closed like a fool bargaining with glass. Tabitha folded the shirt in her lap. Grief makes strange bargains What did yours make? She looked toward the dark yard. To keep walking. If I stopped, I thought everything behind me would catch up. Has it? Yes. He turned slightly. And no, she added. They sat in a silence not empty but held. At last he said, Preacher Abel will come Sunday, for supper, for talk. Her face guarded itself. About marriage? She asked. About protection. That word has been used against women too often. I know, do you? He accepted the rebuke. I know I do not know enough, but I know Mercy Flats will not leave you be. Vale will use talk if law fails. Crane's men might use worse. A lawful place in this house would give you standing. A lawful place as what? Cook? Guardian? Wife? He looked at his hands. That would be for you to decide. And you, I am trying not to decide for you. She studied him. The lamplight showed the tired lines around his mouth. The beard he had not trimmed, the man trying to build a door without making it a cage. I will not be married as charity, she said. No, nor as cover, no, no. Nor to warm a dead woman's chair. Pain crossed his face, but he did not hide from it. No, he said, Clara's chair is Clara's. If you ever sit in this house as my wife, the chair will be yours because you choose it, and I ask it clean. Her eyes lowered. That sounds almost like a proposal. I guess not. Not yet. Good, he said, though it hurt more than he expected. The awkward bargain came 3 days later, not on the porch, but in town, because town mouths had sharpened. Horace Vale stood outside the courthouse with 2 men Gideon did not know. One had a scar from ear to chin. Samuel was at home with Ruth and Amos Pike. Tabitha had come with Gideon to file a statement before the deputy clerk. Since the judge remained away, Lottie Vance had promised to testify if called. Though she shook so badly, she spilled coffee on her own ledger. Vale removed his hat when he saw her. Tabitha, Mrs. Eldridge. Or is that your name today? Gideon stepped forward. Tabitha touched his sleeve, stopping him. It is my name, she said. The scarred man smiled. Pretty widow travels quick. Heard you brought a boy. Tabitha's face paled, but her voice held. You heard wrong. Did I? Vale looked pleased. Talbot, be careful. Harboring questionable women can affect a man's credit. Gideon's hand curled. Tabitha spoke first. A man who steals land through false paper should hesitate before saying questionable. Val's smile vanished. People had begun to gather. Lottie in her doorway, the blacksmith, 2 churchwomen, the station agent, boys with nothing useful to do. Vale said loudly, This woman is fleeing under false pretenses with a child that might not be hers. I will ask the sheriff to investigate whether Talbot Ranch shelters a criminal. The word criminal moved through the crowd like a thrown snake. Gideon felt Tabitha's hand leave his sleeve. She stood alone. I have documents, she said. I have witnesses. And I have a dead husband who knew your handwriting. Vale laughed. Conveniently dead? The scarred man took 1 step toward her. Gideon moved then, not wild, not loud. He placed himself between the man and Tabitha, his right hand resting on his holster. 1 more step, he said. And your next meal comes through a straw. The street went silent. The sheriff, Amos Bell, came out of the jail office with a shotgun crooked over his arm. Trouble? Yes, Gideon said. But not from Mrs. Eldridge. Vale sneered. Mrs. Eldridge, is that what she is? Or is she Talbot's kept woman? The insult landed in the dust between them. Gideon could have struck him. Once, he might have. Instead, he turned to the watching crowd. This woman came to my ranch hungry, carrying a child she swore to protect. She has fed my children, saved a baby from fever, brought evidence of fraud that might save half the valley from thieves in coats. If any man or woman here has a cleaner claim to respect, speak now. No one did. Tabitha's eyes shone, but she kept her chin high. Gideon turned back to Vale. I asked for her place in my house. That is ours to settle before God, not your ledger. The scarred man spat. Touching. Sheriff Bell raised the shotgun an inch. Name? The man's eyes flickered. Tabitha saw it. Silas Crane, she said. The man looked at her. Not Rafe then. Brother, blood of the same trouble. Gideon understood at once. Silas Crane smiled. Tell Samuel his uncle came calling. The sheriff ordered him to stay. Silas bolted instead, shoving through two men, and running for the alley where his horse was tied. Gideon chased. The street exploded with shouts. Silas fired once from the saddle. The bullet shattered the mercantile window. Gideon ducked behind a rain barrel, drew, and shot the horse's bridle strap clean through. The animal reared. Silas fell hard, and Sheriff Bell was on him before he could rise. In Silas's coat pocket, they found a letter from Rafe Crane, alive enough to write and cruel enough to send instructions. Take the boy, burn the Talbot bond if needed. Vale will delay the note until water rights transfer. That letter broke Horace Vale more surely than a fist. He tried to deny it, but Lottie produced her ledger page. The deputy clerk produced the bank copies. Tabitha produced Aaron's packet with shaking hands, and did not look away while men read what her dead husband had risked. By evening, Vale sat in the jail office with his collar wilted, and Silas Crane cursed until Sheriff Bell gagged him with a towel. But victory did not feel clean. On the ride home, Tabitha held herself rigid. Gideon finally said, You did brave today. Brave is a word people give you after danger, because they do not know what shaking feels like. Sigh know some. She looked at him. I almost lost you in the street, he said. Her breath caught. He kept his eyes on the road. Not because you are mine, because you are you. And because I have become a man who looks for you before he knows he is looking. The wagon wheels creaked. Tabitha looked down at her gloved hands. Gideon, I am not asking anything now. Good. But she did not say it as firmly this time. When they reached the ranch, Ruth ran barefoot from the porch with Samuel on her hip, Amos Pike close behind and scolding. Ruth was too small to carry him properly, but she had both arms locked around him and a ferocious expression. I protected him, she announced. Tabitha climbed down and took Samuel, kissing his warm head. I see that, he cried once. I gave him my ribbon. Samuel indeed had Ruth's hair ribbon clenched in his damp fist. Caleb stood on the porch, pretending not to have been afraid. Did you shoot anybody? No, Gideon said. Caleb looked disappointed and relieved. Did anybody shoot at you? Yes, Ruth gasped. But they missed, Gideon added. Tabitha gave him a look that said honesty had limits with children. That night, the house ate late. Beans, cornbread, fried potatoes, peaches from a second jar, because Gideon opened it without asking Grief's permission. They sat closer than they once had. Caleb told Samuel he ought to grow teeth soon, if he meant to live on a ranch. Ruth fell asleep before finishing her peach, cheek sticky on the table. Samuel slept in the cradle with the ribbon still in his fist. After dishes, Tabitha washed and Gideon dried. Their hands brushed over a plate. Neither moved away quickly. I will have to go to court, she said. I'll go with you. You have cattle. I have neighbors. You have debts. Once Vale's papers are thrown out. You have children. So do you. She looked at him. He set the plate down. Samuel is yours. I heard you in town. I heard what that meant. He is my sister's. He is yours. Her mouth trembled. I was afraid if I said it, God might test me by taking him. God has heard worse bargains than that. She laughed softly through tears. Gideon dried his hands and turned to face her. I am going to ask you proper, he said. Not tonight, if you do not wish. Not because of gossip. Not because of Vale. Not because a preacher thought it useful. I will ask because this house listens for your step now. Because my children look to you. and do not flinch from kneading, because Samuel turns toward my voice, and I would be honored to have him know it. Because I set one cup away, and found I wanted another set down. Tabitha gripped the edge of the sink. He stopped. Too much? No, she whispered. It is only that no one has asked me, as if I could say no. You can. I know. That knowledge was what made her weep. He did not touch her until she reached for him. Then he took her hand, rough fingers closing around thin ones, and held it at waist height like something sacred and breakable. 2 Sundays later, Preacher Abel married them under the cottonwoods, because Tabitha said a house still learning its own heart should not be crowded. She wore her black dress, but Ruth pinned a white desert flower near her collar. Caleb stood beside Gideon with Samuel in his arms, solemn as a deputy. Samuel chose the moment of vows to hiccup loudly, which made Ruth giggle into both hands. Gideon did not promise to make her happy every day. He knew better than to promise what no human could hold. He promised truth, shelter, bread when there was bread, work shared, names defended, children protected, silence respected, a hand offered, never forced. Tabitha promised much the same, with one addition. I will not run without telling you where the wolves are, she said. Preacher Abel blinked, but Gideon smiled, and that was answer enough. Marriage did not turn them into strangers wearing romance like new clothes. It made some mornings more awkward. It gave town women fresh reason to whisper, and Gideon fresh reason to stare them silent. It gave Tabitha a room she was not sure how to enter, and a place at the table she approached carefully for weeks. She did not move into Clara's room. Gideon did not ask it. Instead, he cleared the storage room beside his own, whitewashed the walls, repaired the window, and built a wider bed from pine boards. Tabitha made curtains from unbleached cotton and stitched blue thread along the hem. Not Clara's blue, her own. The old shawl stayed on the porch nail until autumn. One cool evening, Ruth took it down and brought it to Tabitha. "My eye?" Ruth asked. Tabitha looked to Gideon. He nodded, but his throat worked. Ruth wrapped the shawl around herself first, breathing in what little scent remained. Then she placed it around Tabitha's shoulders. "It can be worn twice," Ruth said. Gideon turned away, one hand over his mouth. Tabitha knelt and gathered the child close. The court case dragged into winter, as all legal things did when honest people needed speed. Vale lost the bank. 2 ranch notes were cleared. Silas Crane went to territorial prison for attempted kidnapping and fraud. Rafe Crane was caught near Tucson trying to sell horses with another man's brand. Judge Meriwether gave Samuel's guardianship to Tabitha Eldridge Talbot by the authority of her sisters, written Wish and Aaron, Eldridge's witness. When the paper came, Tabitha read it 3 times at the kitchen table. Samuel sat on Gideon's knee, banging a spoon against a tin cup. Caleb pretended the noise did not bother him. Ruth made a crown from corn husks and placed it crookedly on Samuel's head. "He's official now," Caleb said. "He was official before," Ruth said. Gideon looked at Tabitha. "Yes, he was." Winter brought snowlight on the hills and frost on the pump handle. The ranch tightened itself against cold. Gideon taught Caleb to mend harness instead of only curse broken straps. Tabitha taught Ruth to make dumplings and to read recipes from Clara's old notebook without feeling disloyal. Samuel learned to crawl toward the stove. No matter how often everyone turned him around, he grew fat in the cheeks and angry when denied biscuits. One night in January, Gideon woke from a dream calling Clara's name. Tabitha lay still beside him. The room was dark, except for moonlight at the curtain edge. "I am sorry," he said hoarsely. She turned toward him. "Do you want to tell me?" He stared at the rafters. She was asking for water. Tabitha waited. "I could not find the cup." "She has it now," Tabitha whispered. He covered his eyes with one hand. She did not try to pull grief from him like a thorn. She only laid her hand against his chest, light enough to refuse. steady enough to trust. After a while, he covered her hand with his. In spring, the bean seeds by the pump came up after all. Gideon claimed it was stubborn soil meeting a more stubborn woman. Tabitha said the beans had simply been waiting for someone to believe water mattered. Caleb built a crooked fence around the patch to keep chickens out. Ruth painted stones white and lined them along the rows. Samuel ate dirt and looked proud of himself. The house changed so gradually that visitors could not name the hour it happened. The curtain hung straight. The stove hinge was replaced. The front room door stood open. Clara's photograph remained on the dresser, but now beside it sat Ruth's school slate, Caleb's whittled horse, and a small vase Tabitha kept filled with whatever wild thing bloomed. The blue china cup came down on Sunday afternoons. Sometimes Gideon drank from it. Sometimes Ruth filled it with flowers. Once, Samuel dropped a spoon into it and cracked the handle. Everyone froze. Gideon picked up the cup, studied the crack, and then began to laugh. Not loud at first, rusty, surprised. Then Caleb laughed because his father was laughing. Ruth laughed because she was relieved. Tabitha laughed with one hand pressed to her mouth, tears in her eyes. Gideon mended the handle with wire. It was too perfect before, he said. By summer, the Talbot table had grown crowded. Amos Pike came often for supper. Though he insisted, he had only stopped by to check a hinge or borrow a file. Lottie Vance arrived one afternoon with a bolt of blue calico and an apology folded so stiffly it nearly cut her mouth coming out. Tabitha accepted both, but made Lottie sit and shell peas before forgiving her, because dignity sometimes required chores. The town slowly learned what the ranch already knew. Tabitha Eldridge Talbot was not a woman saved by marriage. She was a woman who had carried truth across danger and then taught a wounded house how to eat again. And Gideon Talbot, who had posted for a cook because he could not bear the emptiness of his own kitchen, became a man who set coffee on the stove before dawn, not only for himself, but for the woman who rose beside him. One evening, near the end of August, the whole west burned gold with sunset. The cattle had been brought down from the far pasture. The repaired fence held. The bean vines climbed their poles. On the porch rail, clean dish towels fluttered in the warm wind. Inside, supper waited. Beef stew thick with potatoes, cornbread wrapped in a towel. Peaches opened without sorrow, coffee dark and fragrant near the stove. Caleb had fallen asleep at the table after a day's riding, his head on his folded arms. Ruth carried a blanket over and covered his shoulders without being told. Samuel slept in the old cradle, one hand open, Ruth's faded ribbon tied to the rail above him. Tabitha stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, watching Gideon place 5 cups on the table. Not 4, not one for a ghost, 5 for the living. He turned and saw her looking. "What?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. It was the whole long road behind her. The depot dust, the baby's weak cry, the carpet bag tied with twine, the first biscuit swallowed in shame, the wolves, the court paper, the shawl worn twice, the cup cracked and mended, the children sleeping easier. Gideon crossed the kitchen and stood beside her. He did not crowd. He simply came close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. "You hungry?" he asked. Tabitha smiled, and it changed her face from a woman who had survived into a woman who had come home. "Yes," she said. "I believe I am." Outside, the porch boards held the day's last warmth. The sky lowered itself gently over the New Mexico hills, and in that kitchen, where grief once kept an empty chair and hunger once counted every crumb, a family gathered around the table, passing bread from hand to hand, as if love had always been as simple and as holy as making sure nobody was left unfed.